The Nerdcast Empire is on the air. My mic was a little quiet for some reason there, but we're now good to go for Friday, February 21st, 2025. I am Matt in the studio. Great to have you along with us. And we've got your final look at Nerdcast news before we head into the weekend. And we've got some Twitch-related news. We've got kind of another interesting Switch 1 bundle, which is interesting. And we've also got some news on the WWE that we'll be talking about, both in our final news segment and in the Empire Express, as The Rock is going to come rolling back in tonight and maybe mess up all of WrestleMania. We'll have to see. But joining me in studio on this Friday morning is Mike. Mike, how's it going?
It's going. Yeah, you kind of felt this was coming eventually, where we would get some announcement that The Rock was going to show up and disrupt all of our WrestleMania plans. Thankfully, there isn't that one huge story that you have to make good on. So even if he does kind of implant himself into a high-profile match, it doesn't feel like it's going to be as disruptive as last year.
Yeah, for sure. And we'll see exactly what he's got in mind. We'll talk about a little more on the Empire at the end, Empire Express, because it does feel like at least some of his stopping by is going to have to do with where they are tonight, which is in New Orleans, and potentially a big event coming to New Orleans next year. But let's get to some other news topics before we get to that at the end. And, one of the big ones that has been in the news cycle for the last maybe 24 to 48 hours is some changes coming to Twitch. And, I think one thing that is going to be interesting is to see how people kind of take these changes. I think that is one of those things that you never really know exactly what's going to happen until these changes are implemented, because a lot of times they will back off of these changes, if there is a big backlash to what they announce. So we'll have to see what actually gets implemented here. But the big thing is it has to do with video on demand on Twitch, that they are going to be limiting Twitch uploads and highlights to 100 hours of storage. Clips and past broadcasts, or VODs as you typically call them, will not be affected. Those will still be the same. But, I saw quite a few streamers who have, because Twitch is where they do all their content. They're not like a lot of people, like even us, that we do stuff on Twitch and we do stuff on YouTube. And so, we typically use Twitch for live stuff, archives of live stuff. We use YouTube for VODs and things like that. So, we're not in a situation where something like this would probably affect us anytime soon, but there are people that basically just only use Twitch. So they use Twitch for highlights. They upload and archive subathons and things like that. And, we've seen several of those people basically say hey, their account's telling them you can't create any more highlights until you delete stuff. They've got over 1,400 hours of stuff that's been archived over years and years of streaming. And, it gets to a bigger point, and it'll kind of deal with our second news story. That's why I put them both on there, because they're kind of tied together. But you do have to wonder what Twitch is thinking as far as their big streamers. Like, if we leave Twitch tomorrow, there'll be a handful of people that, might be a little sad. But for the most part, people are not going to miss us when we're gone, and neither is Twitch. But there are some big streamers that presumably bring in pretty large revenue, either directly through advertising or indirectly through subs on their channel, that if they left Twitch, it would certainly leave a dent in their bottom line. So I guess the question is, if you start seeing some of these people leave, where's the balancing act between the revenue lost and potentially the money saved by not having to host all of their highlights and VODs and stuff?
Yeah, I'm certainly not surprised that they want to implement some sort of limit to how much storage they're allowing people to use, because ultimately that does cost them money, and I imagine with the amount of people that are on Twitch, that's got to be a large amount of data and quite the bill for them.
For sure.
Twitch is owned by Amazon, correct?
Yes.
I guess I don't understand why they didn't find some way to kind of pivot this in a different direction, where it's like, hey, we're going to offer you X amount of storage through Amazon Web Services or something,
Mm.
some sort of like separate like sidekick platform where they could charge you some crazy amount of money to keep the stuff up and running. Because ultimately, it seems like what they want is they just want to be known as like the live streaming platform. It's we don't want to house everything you do. I
Right.
think, and it kind of goes back to the argument about which creators do they care about, which ones are the ones that they're really trying to retain, and obviously it's going to be your most successful, highest viewed people, but I think it's also those that will pivot you off to some side website where their content, quote unquote, can be monetized separately from Twitch, and Twitch doesn't have to get their hands dirty with housing it on their website.
I think it's kind of a catch-22 for Twitch because, like you said, I do think they want to be the live streaming website. But they also know that the more stuff you do with another website, the more likely you're just going to be like, well, I'll
Yeah.
just move everything over to that website. And I think that's where they're running into now is, yeah, maybe they do primarily want to be about streams and what we're doing here. But if, you tell me, well, I have all these VODs that you've let me keep for all these years, all these highlights. Now I've got to get rid of these. Well, if I'm going to go to the trouble to move 1,400 hours worth of content or whatever, maybe I just need to start streaming somewhere else as well. And so that's where you run into some issues. And like you said, I think there are certainly some issues with Twitch as far as content. And like I said, we'll talk about a little bit of that with the ban update that they passed along. But yeah, the thing I'm not understanding about the whole situation, and it's just another one of these situations, and it's happened so often in technology, really dating back to newspapers giving newspapers away for free on the internet, and then realizing, oh wait, we've been charging for this for 100 years. Why are we giving this away for free? And the horse has already left the barn, and people don't want to pay for it when they should have been paying for it from the beginning, and then it wouldn't have been a big deal. This is kind of the same thing where it's like when you realize some of these streamers were starting to get so big that they were taking up so much bandwidth and data, that's when you should have released some sort of tiered system. Like you said, hey, if you're like us and you just stream occasionally and you don't mind your stuff disappearing after 30 days, like you can have the base, you're free to do it and good for you and have fun. And if you're somebody who's a high volume user, if you want to keep your stuff here, we're good with that. But here is this Amazon Web Service add-on that you're going to have, or some sort of Twitch Premium that is going to allow you some perks too. Because I mean, you can maybe you get a bigger cut, maybe you get a direct live line to Twitch when there's any kind of, or you have maybe somebody who's specifically responsible for your channel, so you don't have some random admin come in and decide they don't like what you're doing and ban you. There's ways to do it that can create value for these high volume streamers and also keep you from having to lose money on these people because they've got so much data tied up in those handful of channels.
And I think that's the curious thing about it, just from a business perspective, is that clearly in this story, they're just removing features from using their service. There's no like, yeah, but you could pay this and get this instead.
Right.
Like, it's very much like a Crunchyroll removing comments. It's like, okay, you're going to start charging me more money and you're taking away features. That seems backwards. And this is similar. It's why aren't you giving me some sort of solution to this problem? Like, I think we can all agree that there is something that needs to be addressed here about your guys' business model, but you're not even giving me the opportunity to spend more money with you to remedy this.
Yeah, I think that's, to me, the most confusing part. And again, this probably should have happened a few years ago. This shouldn't just be happening now. And the problem now is because you've done it backwards. If you come back in 3 months and say, okay, we won't make you remove this stuff, but you're going to have to pay X amount a month to have it. Now it looks like, oh, well, you panicked everybody just so you could sell.
You were totally willing to do the worst possible thing until you realized how unacceptable that was to people. So now you have to walk it back.
Yeah, which, I mean, that's... maybe that's what
it doesn't change the fact you still wanted to do the worst possible thing to people.
Yeah, exactly. So, I don't know how this is going to go about. I don't know. And that's the question. And we can even kind of tie it into our second news story about the ban thing is, what streamers are they willing to lose? What, where where are they willing to draw the line? Because it would be easy to say, well, this person they let them do anything, and this person they don't, and so there's the line. But it feels like with Twitch, that line moves all over the place.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, this person can do whatever they want, but this person over here who's kind of doing the same thing, no, you're banned. Like,
Or worse, now we don't think you should be able to do whatever you want, even though we've let you do whatever you want up to a certain point.
yeah, and that's the thing that supposedly Twitch is trying to improve with expiration dates for violations on bans, allowing for reinstatement. Basically, a slider system where minor offenses receive minor punishment, and trying to improve transparency, which has been long since you know just non-existent, basically in a lot of cases. And again, in a lot of cases, and we're not talking about the big streamers because they're set. Like those people make so
Yeah.
much money and they generally have diversified income. But we're talking about kind of the mid-range streamers, the people who are literally trying to do this for a living, who maybe have now gotten to the point where they can make a living off of it, but it's not like they're rolling in money. And then Twitch bans them. I mean, the VTuber space is obviously a space where I've seen it a ton. And now it's like these people have lost their income. They can't get an answer as to why they got banned. They can't get an answer as to when they'll be unbanned. It becomes this big vague thing where it's just I can't imagine you walking into your job today and being like, we're suspending you without pay. Well, what did I do? Well, we can't tell you.
Yeah.
When am I coming back? Well, we don't know. Like, you want to talk about just utter panic? That would be insane.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I like the idea that it seems like they're wanting to be more transparent about it. I think that's a good thing, but I still I need to see it in action because I think, kind of to your point, there are way too many instances where it almost seems like a rogue admin just hates a certain style of content and goes, you know, crazy on it as far as issuing bans. And then there's some, especially kind of in the more like lewd space of Twitch, there are live streamers that seem to get a pass to do whatever, and I'm sure they bring in a crazy amount of money, but like I think that tarnishes your service's reputation.
I think anytime you can enforce things with consistency, people will understand. They may still be mad, they might not be happy, but at least you can clearly say, like, you did X. If this person does X, they're also going to get banned for the same amount of time. That's what you have to have, because then you can just tell her, here are the rules. We're going to enforce them. I don't care if you're in a hot tub somewhere licking a microphone or you're a VTuber who's, got their shoulders exposed. Like, the rules are going to be the same for everybody. And that's all people want, is just make it the same, make it clear, make it transparent. And in the end, yeah, people might not like your rules, but they will abide by them if you give them a clear path and consistent enforcement to do so.
I think also with like the VTuber space that they kind of are unlucky in that we're in this weird point in time now where anything that's kind of anime or anime adjacent is getting more heavily scrutinized than things that are live action. I
Yeah.
think whether you're talking about anime or video games or manga, I think there's this new kind of weird push to censor a lot of that where 20 years ago we made fun of localization and what they did to things like Pokemon as far as like the jelly donuts and whatnot.
Yeah.
And weirdly enough, I don't know what has caused it. You kind of see it going the other direction now, where almost like it's weird if you don't want that stuff censored or altered.
Yeah, it's again, it's just inconsistency with that's just another example of it where it's okay if a person does this, a real live person, but as soon as it's in a cartoon, as soon as it's in an anime, as soon as it's in a video game, like all of a sudden now it's a problem. And
It's weird because I know that these aren't quote unquote boomers that are having that opinion, but it's a very much old person mindset where it's, well, if it's animated, it should be for kids, and we have to adjust the standards accordingly. It's really strange, and I thought we had kind of broken free from that in the early 2000s.
I thought so too, but the thing of it is, like you talk about not being, kind of being what you would term a boomer mindset. Well, a lot of us anime fans, a lot of the old school anime fans, are getting into that age group now. So it feels like those are the people that are actually more understanding now in some regard, and it's a different generation that, or just some rogue people that decide that they want to tell you what you can enjoy and what you can't enjoy. And then obviously there are some things that need to be banned or restricted or put behind walls. We're not suggesting
There is a line. It's just we don't need it to shift necessarily.
yeah, and we don't need it to be inconsistent, to be here
Yeah.
one day and there the next. And that's the whole thing with Twitch. And I'm curious to see what happens because there has been a pretty strong pushback, especially on the storage thing. But, you know, the ban thing is just one of those things people are just going to have to wait and see.
Yeah.
And what actually comes of it, I don't know. But we're not looking to get banned here anytime soon, so I don't think we're going to have to worry about it. But
We're very not questionable, or we don't really push the envelope in any sense.
that's our goal. Maybe a little bit in the music we listen to, but beyond that, we try to be a podcast for everyone. So we're going to continue to do that, and we'll let the bathtub streamers, live on that edge.
It's very much the Zennial mindset where you're kind of pulling in that Gen X, like we're just here. We're
Yeah.
not. We don't care. We're not trying to disrupt anything.
Yeah, we're not punk rock at this point. Like we're
Punk rock isn't even punk rock anymore.
Well, that's
so,
a good point. But yeah, so just something to keep an eye on. And if you're a Twitch streamer, especially if you're a big Twitch streamer, you're certainly well in tune with what's going on here. A couple other smaller stories to wrap up this week's edition and this Friday's edition. What was interesting to me is we've got a new Switch OLED bundle coming out. It leaked online. It's going to include Super Mario Brothers Wonder. It's going to be sold for $349. We'll also have 3 months of Nintendo Switch Online. And I think I understand the reason, but I'm curious to get your thoughts on it. Kind of seems like Nintendo's way of trying to move a little bit of stock before the Switch 2 rolls around, is it not?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm excited, especially for people who don't currently own an OLED. It's definitely worth picking up. The Switch has been a tremendous system just overall. So if you don't own one yet, jump on this. If you don't have an OLED, go ahead and get one of those because chances are your non-OLED one's been around a while and probably won't last forever. I'm excited that they finally have a bundle that doesn't include Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. I feel like for a good amount of years, 5-6 years, that's been the annual bundle they've offered.
Like Frampton Comes Alive.
Basically, you're just issued it. It's there's something kind of cool too about the thought of you getting Super Mario Brothers Wonder. To me, there's nothing more logical than getting a 2D Super Mario Brothers game packaged in with your Nintendo console. I feel like we saw that back in the day with the NES, the Super Nintendo. It just feels right. And again, it's been a tremendous system. There's plenty to play on there. If you haven't jumped into Switch, now's a pretty good time to do it.
And I think that's the message from Nintendo is like, look, yeah, we're going to be releasing a new system. Yeah, there's going to be really cool things. And if you're in that market for something new and you've been with Switch for a long time, like absolutely jump into the Switch 2. We'll tell you all about it in April. But if you don't have that handheld system, if you're looking to get into it, we still got a ton of fun stuff on this system. It's going to continue to be fun for a long time. So it's not like we're just going to be like, you should throw your Switch out the window and just, forget it and get a Switch 2. Like, we're going to be like, hey, we're going to, give you this OLED, which is really awesome because from all accounts, the Switch 2, at least to start with, is not going to be the OLED version. The rumor has it it's going to be the plastic or whatever it was, the original. Mainly, and I've seen the argument for it. It's like, there's going to be a lot of kids have that thing in their hand when they first start, and you don't want your 3-year-old dropping an OLED Switch 2 and shattering the screen right out of the gate. So
you're always going to run into that with Nintendo products, which, that is what it is.
It is. And, they'll eventually come back with an OLED version, I'm sure, probably a year or two down the road because that's how those things work. But this is really cool. I mean, chance to get in, like you said, get the 2D Mario Brothers game, which gives you that nostalgia feeling. And buy a great system that if you want to buy this and play it for the next 5 years, there's so much out there. You're going to have a lot of fun with it, even if you don't upgrade to the Switch 2.
And the other thing, too, is that with it being Nintendo, I don't think there's necessarily any guarantee that post-release of Switch 2 we'll see a huge price drop in the Switch OLED.
Right.
I don't. They're rarely beholden to drop prices on anything. So, and you are getting a $60 game packaged in for the price of just the console. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, for sure. It's if you've been wanting to jump into the Switch, now could still be a good time. Even if you could still wait for the Switch 2, but If you're not necessarily needing the high end features or the latest and greatest, you can still really get an awesome system for a really good price. One last wrestling story that we're going to tack on here at the end, and this originally came from Fightful, but there was an article written by Cultaholic that kind of got viral yesterday, basically talking about the women in WWE complaining about their booking. It's not Royal Rumble 2022 level, which Fightful reported yesterday evidently was Vince's idea that Ronda Rousey would come back into the 2022 Rumble and eliminate everybody.
That would have been hilarious.
It sure would have. Yeah, it's
The problem is, I love that idea, but that should be Shayna Baszler doing that.
yes, that's another argument that we could discuss because that's 100% true. But we've talked about it on our wrestling podcasts and our other podcasts. Is WWE is doing a lot of things right, and their program is more enjoyable to watch than it's probably been in many years. But there are a handful of things that they're not doing right. And the number one thing is their women's division, really their entire women's division on the main roster, but specifically mid-card titles, which they created to supposedly give more women a chance and really haven't, and their tag team titles, which have totally been wasted by just waiting around for Jake Cargill to get back. I totally understand. And it kind of sounds like that some of these women have been pitched these meaningless tag matches at WrestleMania to get them on the card. And they're like, no, like we've got these titles, book this division better. Like,
Yeah.
it wouldn't be as stark if you didn't turn around and tune in on Tuesday nights on NXT and see Shawn Michaels and his crew booking their women's division as a complete equal to their men's division, and those segments doing great ratings every week. So I don't understand why it's not being done.
Yeah, and it kind of annoys you even more that they thought it was necessary to get rid of the NXT women's tag titles because you have enough women down there of the level of quality where you wouldn't mind seeing a fleshed out tag division again.
For sure.
Yeah, it's weird. I think at the very top of the women's division, they're doing things pretty well still. I think that's fine. Yeah, the tag titles just don't feel super important with Naomi and Bianca Belair as champions. They're just kind of holding them. Not that they aren't putting on good matches when they have matches.
Yeah,
I
for
just
sure.
think it's unnecessary.
They're two singles wrestlers that are holding the
Yeah.
tag titles, and there's not the furthering of women's tag team. I mean, we saw it with Isla Dawn getting released. It's like,
Yeah. Still don't get that one.
still don't understand that one.
And I think it was good that they did both implement the mid card titles and who they picked to be the inaugural
Great
champions. I
chance.
think are totally fine. I'm all
Absolutely.
for that. I don't need to see every other week another match between Chelsea Green and Mia Yim. I think we need to build that out a little more where there are some other challengers.
As much as I wouldn't care if Mia Yim won the title, because she's great.
Yeah, it's nothing against either competitor. It's just it kind of goes back to the criticisms we used to have of WWE, where it was just rematch after rematch that you felt was never ending and not really
going anywhere.
Yeah, you didn't feel like any of it was important. People always jump to the whole they should do another Evolution pay-per-view, and like, not that I'm opposed to that in principle, but I think that's just kind of a cop-out solution. I think ultimately the goal should be to put yourself in a situation where you can book a 50-50 pay-per-view or PLE where men's and women's matches are kind of presented in an equal ratio, but you care about all of them.
Yes.
My concern is that if you just jump to an Evolution pay-per-view, and this sounds disrespectful, but I think in a lot of ways it's still true, half the matches you wouldn't really care about not because they're women, but because WWE haven't booked these wrestlers in a way that make you care about what they're doing.
Well, you see it on TV every week. There'll be a couple of matches with women that I like all the people in the match, but it's like the crowd just sits there on their hands because, again, not because they're women. It's because you haven't made the crowd care about these people enough, heel or face, to cheer or boo. Like, they generally, it's like, hey, I like Dakota Kai when she wins. Yay, that's great. Like, let's build a story. Dakota's got a great story. I mean, she's been hurt. She's battling back. She never gives up. Like, and the other thing too is, there's almost no crossover outside of Judgment Day with like your men and women storylines. And there's like what the New Day's doing. How many women would fall into the same category as the New Day and their complaints right now about
Yeah.
being overlooked? And I mean, Shayna Baszler would fit right in with those two. Why don't you do that? Like, because that immediately makes people care about what she's doing, and you have and then she can just decide she's going to start wrecking people. Like,
I mean, you have her, you have when Asuka returns, you have Asuka, two women who ran roughshod over the NXT women's division, where they were just these unbeatable monsters who were monsters just because they were believable that they could fight. And I think there's a place for them to kind of redo that on either show, if not both shows. I just don't know why we're not doing that.
yeah, and again, when you hear things like this person's not over or somebody gets released because they're not over, that yes, to some degree the performer does carry some of the weight of that. Like, there are things, if they're not good at promos, if they're not making the most of their time, like you get that. Because you look at someone like Chelsea Green, she can be on TV for 30 seconds and you're going to remember it because she just does a great
Yeah,
job,
absolutely.
an unnaturally good job at just making the most of limited time. But that's also on the writing staff. That's also on the booking staff. Like, if you're not giving me and the fans a compelling reason to care about these people, you're not going to get them over. And no matter what they do or how good they are in the ring or how good their promos are, like, if you're not making something make sense, it's just not going to. I mean, it's the biggest issue with AEW right now.
Yeah.
Who cares about most of the people on their television show? Like, that's the issue.
Now, in WWE's defense, to some degree, I feel like we felt this exact same way about the men's tag team division, and they have been making strides to making it more compelling. And,
Yeah.
and if you look at who's holding the titles on both shows, you kind of feel like we're finally seeing what Triple H's vision for the main roster would have been had kind of the NXT black and gold been able to transition properly to Raw and SmackDown. It's you have your teams at the top like the War Raiders and DIY, and they're actually putting them in situations where you kind of care about what they're doing finally.
Yeah. And I think I would hope that they can fix more than one thing at once. Like,
Yeah.
I hope it's like, okay, we're fixing the men's tag division right now. We can't be bothered to the women's.
Yeah, it's like you don't want to think
mid-card.
that they're that segmented, but at least there are some positive.
You hope.
Like, clearly they understand what looks like progress.
Yeah, for sure. And again, it's only really bad because you see on NXT and you see everything that's going on there, and it's just like, they're the women's matches routinely in pay-per-view. They last premium live event for NXT, a women's match main evented, and people loved it, and it made sense. And
you kind of had the surprise with Jordan Grace showing up at the end, even though you kind of knew it was going to happen. But it was still basically, you had her, Stephanie Vaquer, and Julia in the ring, where it's like, these are the biggest stars on this brand right now.
Yeah, and they're not far from being the biggest stars in the company on the women's side. There are a couple, obviously, on the main roster that have elevated, and mostly Liv Morgan and Rhea Ripley, and obviously Charlotte Flair.
Well, I think that's the other thing too, and you never want to see future layoffs and job cuts, but you can't help but feel like they don't think their women's division on Raw and SmackDown has really achieved its final form yet.
Yeah.
And it'll be interesting to see what the landscape looks like and who the big players are on Raw and SmackDown this time next year.
The biggest thing is, if they're thinking in those terms, they need to make sure they're giving good time to their women's division, because it's, when you see someone like Indy Hartwell get let go, and Isla Dawn, and, Tegan Knox, like, they just felt like good soldiers that maybe you just kind of didn't do everything to try to to prop up. So
yeah,
we'll see where it goes. But I think it's good that these news is getting out there. So maybe they'll see there's an urgency and maybe a pushback from the fans, which is really sometimes what drives change in WWE, even with the new regime. It's time to bring this thing to a close. Let's head to the Empire Express. Are you ready to go?
Let's do it.
Well, it's the big one right off the bat. In a post on X on Thursday evening, the great disruptor, the final boss, The Rock, has announced he's going to show up on SmackDown tomorrow night, which is now tonight, in New Orleans. WWE is playing up the chaos that may ensue. Is this good marketing, or is he about to mess up all their plans again?
I don't think he can disrupt things nearly to the degree he did last year. And with stars like Cena and Punk active for WrestleMania this year, it could bring about some interesting matchups that maybe we didn't think we would see. So I'll be cautiously optimistic about all this. We'll see what happens. Former WWE personality Jonathan Coachman said on his podcast yesterday that Shane McMahon wanted both equity in AEW and to, quote, run the show, and was ghosted by Tony Khan after their famous meeting. Does any of this surprise you?
Not at all. Like, I would 100% believe Shane would ask for that because it probably feels like he wants to make a point like, hey, if you're bringing me in, I'm going to have control of everything. And I totally understand, even with the complaints about Tony Khan I've understood with as much money as he's bankrolled and that not wanting to give control to an outsider. So totally understandable. Samurai Pizza Cats, a Saban adaptation of the Japanese anime Kyato Ninden Teiyandi, or Cat Ninja Legend Teiyandi, is getting a new side-scrolling RPG video game. Is there enough nostalgia for this show for this game to end up being popular?
There has to be more than I realize, I guess. I kind of think back to the release of the Cowabunga collection of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle games that did pretty well in 2022, as well as Shredder's Revenge. Those definitely some nostalgia, and people were really amped about that. Maybe there's kind of the same thing about Samurai Pizza Cats. Doesn't do a lot for me, but, maybe there's something there.
Got some love in the chat for Samurai Pizza Cats, so maybe so. We'll have to keep our eye out for it.
Let's see. What question is next? My list is backward here.
Oh, 3 big surprises.
3 big surprises on TNA Impact's live show on Thursday is Elijah, the man formerly known as Elias in WWE, and the Colognes made surprise debuts. Then Obafemi came to the aid of the Hardys and Leon Slater against the System. TNA seems to be heading in the right direction, right?
Yeah, for sure. And they had a great crowd, and it was great to hear the crowd walk with Elijah. He's one of those guys I'll probably never understand why WWE got rid of him. Obafemi coming in, they set up a 6-man tag match with him and the Hardys against the System coming up. That's just, him and Moose, I can't wait to see that match. That's going to be great stuff. So, yeah, TNA definitely feels like it's going in the right direction. And finally, while NXT's overall viewership dropped below 700,000 this week, AEW Dynamite's viewership fell again after the Australia show, falling to 563,000. Where is the floor for the AEW ratings?
I really didn't have them plan to drop below 500K anytime soon. I kind of thought that would be where you had your diehards kind of in their little world, but I suppose you never know. Maybe we could end up in the 4s before the end of the year.
It's crazy to think. Some big changes are going to be needed and soon if they're going to continue to do any kind of ratings at all. It's pretty wild to see them continue to drop to that level. That is going to wrap things up for the Friday edition of the Nerdcast News Report. You're all caught up with your news and ready to go into the weekend. Just a reminder, we will be back on Sunday night for another episode of Music Weekly. The music of February the 7th will be on tap for this Sunday night, 7 o'clock Eastern Time, live on Twitch and on YouTube. And then, of course, we'll be back Monday morning. We'll get you caught up on all the weekend's news. Now, we may have some OhioCon lawsuit news on Monday morning, too. So they had the hearing yesterday. Nothing's been uploaded yet, but we'll let you know if there's some news there. That'll be coming up Monday morning, 8:30 a.m. Eastern Time on the Nerdcast Empire. Big thanks to everybody for joining us. Big thanks for the Stove Lake Media for their continued support of our podcast. Big thanks to Mike for joining me in studio, and a big thanks to you for listening wherever and whenever you may be listening to the Nerdcast Empire. That's going to wrap things up. We'll talk to you again on Sunday for Music Weekly. Until then, don't forget to join the Empire, the Nerdcast Empire.